The staircase at 45 White Oak looks simple, and that's intentional, but it's actually one of the more complicated elements in this entire home. When building modern architecture, a lot of what goes into the final result is never seen, but it really ties back to early conversations in pre-construction, the forethought going into it, really considering what the end result is, and then working backwards on how do we get to that end result and getting the entire team to buy into that. A component of architecture at this level can only really be experienced in person. I think when someone walks into this space, they're met with so many opportunities to focus on, and each one of them has kind of a different reaction. For the staircase, you know, quite literally everyone that walks into this space kind of spins around and stares at it. You almost do a bottom to top where you start understanding the details at eye level and you work your way up to the 25-foot atrium. You know, above the staircase is the skylight we built, you know, 25 feet above the first floor. And that is a moment in itself. But you're almost drawn back down and then inspired by the craftsmanship in the staircase itself, the carpentry, the woodwork, the plaster, you know, the way something was not only built, but how it was designed, and the considerations of alignment of materials and alignment of details. You know, there's so many things that can be appreciated on this. The biggest takeaway from this staircase is when you're looking at something that is complicated or has an immense amount of detail, there's this understanding or notion to want to know how long it's going to take or how much it's going to cost. And naturally so, there's a budget, there's a schedule, you know, you ultimately want to work efficiently and find the most efficient path forward. But sometimes you need to step back and just understand, what is the goal? What's the vision here? And how can we accomplish it? And look at that where holistically, it might be very challenging to understand, but when you start breaking it down into components, it becomes more and more manageable and easier to understand. And what happens is we start understanding the key players that will help us get to that result. The White Oak handrail component of this build is a great example, where we worked with someone that understood how to 3D map on site. They were able to scan the whole as-built condition on site in 3D that our 3D modeler was able to then build a component off of. And that component, he's not a handrail manufacturer, he was someone that understood how to read 3D and model in 3D. We dissected that into components. Instead of trying to manufacture one big piece of white oak that is curving and swooping and doing all these things, we segmented that into small sections. And then together, they're one really complicated thing. But individually, they're quite simpler. And I think that when you look at the staircase as a whole, you can really take that same approach. Rather than looking at the big complicated thing, think about how you can componentize that into more manageable pieces. So Madeira Surfaces was our partner on all the white oak in this home, and we actually gave them the shop drawings, and they produced all of the stair treads and the stair risers for us. So that was our first component that we knew we could make even prior to construction starting. From there, while we were framing the house, we used those shop drawings to create the opening for the staircase. We knew how big the staircase would be, we knew where it needed to land, how it interacted with the lower levels, and how it interacted with the upper level. So when we're framing, we took that into consideration as if it was a component that would land in place eventually. Now, when we were in framing, we actually worked with our carpenters on site and framed the staircase. You know, for us, when we're framing a staircase, there's a lot of things that we take into consideration, but the number one most important thing is how someone's going to be interacting with that staircase through the life of the home. When they're walking up and down the staircase, does it feel solid? Is it loud? Does it bounce? All of these things are taken into consideration. So for us, when we're framing a staircase like this or any staircase, structure is really a big part of of how we go about this. We're going to be using LVL stringers, oftentimes doubled up, so we get this really solid staircase under our foot, and then we're typically boxing that staircase in. And what I mean by boxing it in is that the stair treads and risers all get boxed with Advantech plywood, glued and screwed, so you're really creating this one single component that moves as one. Now, before we close the staircase up, we actually fill all the cavities with a rock wool mineral wool. It really helps deaden the sound, so when your foot is going up the stairs, you're not getting this hollow box sound. Especially when you are boxing it in, you don't want that knocking sound going up. The guardrail around the staircase coming down the stairs, even on the first floor and second floor, was designed to be this solid plaster wall. So what we ultimately ended up doing is building a structural wall out of 2 layers of plywood that gave us the base layer for what would eventually be the finish. The interesting thing about doing this was it actually gave us the opportunity to start understanding how this wall would come together, what pieces were going to be really complex to figure out, and how we were going to work through some of the tighter radiuses as you come down from the second floor onto the first floor. The details on this staircase really required careful coordination because it wasn't a linear process. And for this staircase, there was a lot of back and forth between trades. Once we got the structure done, we started to consider what step had to go first. And we knew we had 2 major components on this staircase. We had the plaster guardrail, or the plaster wall, and then we had the white oak handrail with the inner wall. Both of those things had to really come together as one, but still be very separate in terms of what they were designed for. So when we started putting together the pieces, we realized that we could only bring plaster so far. So the plasterers spent a lot of time building and shaping the staircase, but had to hit pause until we got the white oak handrail installed, because the white oak handrail ultimately was going to be what dictated the shape of the plaster. So that handrail was actually installed and tied back to the structure of the stair prior to plaster being finished. And once it was installed, the plastering team restarted their scope, and they spent the time actually setting what we call a reveal bead, which essentially allows them to bring plaster up tight to the white oak, but leaves a really nice, about 2 millimeter gap between the 2 materials. And then they started basing out the plaster from there, shaping the top of the wall, working through that really tight radius at the very bottom of the staircase, coming down the stairs, and ultimately across that first floor. Now that shape also runs up to the second floor and across the front and back landings of the center of the home, which creates the guardrail on that second floor. One of the details that was decided really early on was that we were also going to have an LED light in the floor. So as we're basing out the plaster, we need to make sure that also allows for the LED light to be installed. The wood flooring is installed at this point. Again, from a coordination aspect, we needed the wood floor installed prior to plaster being done because of the way reveals work and shadow gaps work. So we're thinking really far in advance and trying to work backwards from it. Once plaster was done and we had the shape done, the oak handrail needed to now be infilled. So we have the solid white oak handrail, and we have to build our inner wall, essentially the white oak wall that you have adjacent to you as you're walking up the stairs. So we framed out the wall and then actually used what is called wacky wood or bendable plywood, and then created our base layer for what would eventually be the white oak veneer. Now, the white oak veneer we knew was going to be the most time-consuming component here. Frankly, it was one of those things that the team went round and around of how should we do this? Should we bend laminate it off-site and cut it to fit? And ultimately, we chose to do it all on-site. By building our base layer and creating a really flat surface for this wall, we could then come in and hand-stitch the white oak veneer that was actually provided by Madeira to match the flooring and all the other white oak in the home, and do that by cutting piece by piece. Part of the way they did that is they actually used floor protection material and started creating a template or a stencil, and they fit that to make sure it would fit in the wall and be prepped for the curves. And once they knew that it fit and all of their reveals were right, they were able to transfer that onto the veneer, cut the veneer, and then hand stitch that wall up into the second floor. With all of that done, we were able to install the stair treads and the risers. The thing I love about the stair treads and risers on this project is that it is all white oak, and a lot of times you see this kind of waterfall effect. But we chose to do a bullnose tread, which really softened the staircase. You had this uniform material going up the stairs, but that bullnose really softens the step going up and pulls from that more traditional, organic maybe feeling stair versus the very geometric and square stair. We want to feel livable, we want to feel soft and quiet. And that was really what led us to that specific design. The other thing that we did was we wanted to separate the stair treads and risers from the plaster. You know, we knew that the white oak wall and stair treads and risers would all be kind of one component, but when they were to introduce themselves to another material, we wanted to create really intentional separation. So we did that by actually leaving a 1/8 inch gap between white oak and plaster and filled that with a piece of black rubber. And the reason we did that is as you're going up the stairs, it creates a really crisp line and definitive line between the two materials. We know that that wall is what we call super flat because of the way it was plastered and, you know, straight edged across the entire surface. But separating those materials ever so slightly gives us this really crisp line, almost as though if you were blending two materials and taking a pencil or a pen and to create that separation. So we did that on the upper stairs all the way up to that second floor to create that aesthetic. Now the lower stair, we did something similar where you actually have wall-to-wall plaster, so we kept the stair treads and risers off both sides. But the lower stair is designed to not be a focal point. It's not intended to be this architectural moment in the home, but we wanted it to be respectful to what we've done everywhere else. So some of the things that we paid attention to down there was making sure that the staircase was wide. It was going to be the main entry point for the family. You know, you're coming in from the garage and the mudroom. We wanted that staircase to feel really comfortable going up or down. So it's wider than you would typically see. We also rolled the ceiling underneath the upper stair into the lower staircase and into the hallway. So as you're coming down the staircase, again, you're not met with these geometric moments. It's really flowing and consistent with the organic aesthetic and organic materials. Being that you're wall to wall down there, we also had this handrail that was necessary for the staircase, but something that we wanted to make sure that we were really considerate about how it was going to be installed. So this goes back to really early planning, but we had these handrail brackets that we had made that were designed to be anchored back to the framing. So typically you would see a handrail bracket mounted on top of the plaster with exposed fasteners. Instead here, we mounted that back to the framing and had them custom made, so when plaster and wallboard was installed, you still had the proper projection and then the support for your handrail, but you had this really minimal, again, simplistic looking design that frankly took a lot of careful consideration and a lot of forethought going into that. And one of the things I love that our team did is they actually built an escutcheon around that handrail bracket. So as they were plastering it, the plaster was actually kept away from the stainless steel just about a 1/16 of an inch. So you had this really intentional separation between material. And of course, when the handrail is grabbed on and you're moving it, you're not running the risk of anything cracking or breaking. It's giving it the necessary separation. There's so many moments in something like this that can essentially present you with the option of, let's just not do that. It will be easier to do this, or we could make a different version of that. And the ability to continue to always understand what the vision is and always push to get to that end result, it's really the difference between wanting and respecting the architectural vision or compromising the result for something that is just easier. When you step back and see the staircase complete, you can really appreciate what it is and all of the difficulties kind of are gone, because it is easier to step back and do something else and compromise the vision for what is the path more traveled. But instead, we're looking at this as, this is hard. We need to understand how to do this as efficiently as possible. But we also have to protect the vision behind what we're trying to accomplish. So looking at it when it's done, it's like that moment of catching your breath and realizing, man, that was all worth it. And for how that impacts us as builders today and in the future, and the tradespeople that were involved in this, I think it really encourages all of us to reconsider a challenge and understand that we have the ability to accomplish it. We just need to have the mindset to do it.